Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of the Cover One Roundup podcast here live on the Cover One YouTube channel or subsequently wherever you listen to podcasts. I am your, co-host, Kyle Silagyi, joined today and every week by Rob Quinn, feature writer at Cover One. And today we are going to be breaking down Bills Stadium news. Are we the number one Austin Bills podcast? I don't know. We'll talk about it. And we'll also be talking about Bills training camp, takeaways, stuff like that. This show and Cover One in general are brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, who we will be hearing from in just a moment from Rob Quinn. But before that, a little bit of housekeeping. Number one, my glasses have caused a huge controversy on this show. Numerous comments from the people saying, I'm distracted by the reflection off your glasses. I think I figured it out almost. There's still a glare, but if I do like a Kubrick stare into the camera, it kind of limits the glare a little bit. So we're going to try that. If it's still bad, I'm sorry. We'll try to fix it more going forward. And also, I'm a little bit sick. I have a sore throat and sinus stuff. So if I cough during the podcast or need to take a break for water, please forgive me in advance. And we also have a mystery guest who we will be debuting in just a minute here. Here we go already. I'm distracted by the reflection in your glasses. Sorry, we'll fix it for next week. Get non-reflective glasses. So we have a mystery guest to discuss training camp and takeaways from Saturday's public practice. But before we introduce him, Rob, tell us about Underdog Fantasy.
Yeah, Underdog Fantasy is a relatively new fantasy app that we've partnered here with at Cover One. They do a lot of great stuff. I'm actually in a live slow draft with our Greg Tomset, who organized it, and several of our
invite.
Loyal Cover One followers. That league filled up quick, man. But it's cool. It's got a nice format. Best ball. During the season, you could play player parlays and props and all different things of that nature. So if you use the code COVER1, they will match your deposit up to $25. So if you want to win some money, maybe lose some money like me, it's a great place to join and have some fun this year.
Speaking of our own Greg Tomset, the mystery guest for this week's podcast is the host of the Cover One podcast. It's Greg Tomset. Greg, thank you for being here.
So when people say I'm not only the president, I'm also a client. I'm currently in 9 drafts in Underdog right now. So
and I couldn't get an invite to a single one.
Lots more coming around. But yeah, we're having a lot of fun with it. I'm still learning my way through it, but I'm really a big fan.
So Greg, as the title of this podcast implies, we're talking about training camp this week, and you were fortunate enough, with about 15,000 other Bills fans, to be at the stadium this weekend to take in live football, live practice football for the first time in years. So do you have any initial takeaways from this Saturday practice?
So first, it was awesome just to be there and to have the surroundings and to have the fans, the entire setup. It was perfect. It was like 70 degrees and sunny. It was a gorgeous, gorgeous day. I actually think it was probably closer to 18,000.
Really?
So I'm curious where the number came from. A lot of the pictures you look at it, the lower bowl holds 35,000. 60% of that is a little over 20,000. You look at those pictures, it looks more than 60%. So when I was asked about it, I was like, yeah, probably about 60% of what's there. So 15 was actually a little low, in my opinion. And it was loud. It was fun. Everybody was having a good time. And it felt normal. It felt normal. And I know there's been different times that each of us have gone, and whether it's seeing music or going around and being places, it was nice to feel that vibe again. So really excited to be able to see everything coming back. And then, as far as practice goes, I know a lot of people heard a lot of the names floating around, but several of the younger guys really, really flashed. So I was really excited to be able to see some pleasant surprises.
Now, who in your opinion really stood out the most? I know that you tweeted a lot of video, and Jay Kumerow got a lot of run, as well as Gregory Rousseau and AJ Epinesa. Obviously, the defenders are who fans are most excited to see, but Kumerow's really a name that many were kind of surprised to see take such a stranglehold on that bottom receiver position. So what are your thoughts on Kumerow's performance on Saturday?
Obviously some of it is the benefit of when Josh Allen throws a nice pass to somebody, if you're a professional receiver, it's going to look pretty good. But he was getting open, and he looked good, and he looked faster than I remembered. I mean, he's a big guy. He's 6'4". His calling card is, hey, he can play a little bit of receiver, but he's a special teams contributor, kind of runs down there like a madman with his long hair flapping in the wind. He looked legitimate as a receiver. Like, he looked like a contributor, and obviously his name came up a ton because Aaron Rodgers talked about him as the second best receiver in camp last year, and that he was, legitimately upset when the Packers cut him and the Bills claimed him, and then he hung on the roster and made a little name for himself there, and actually, caught a touchdown pass against the Broncos, played some special team snaps. And I thought, hey, with Hodgins coming back off IR and we replace John Brown and you have younger guys coming up, I don't know that I see a path for it. And now I think there's a legitimate discussion of, okay, do we need to hide Marquez Stevenson on the practice squad? Is there a chance for Hodgins to make this roster? Does Hodgins contribute in special teams the way that Kumerow does? Can we get the Packers to pay an inappropriate amount for a guy that we probably could afford to trade away? He has made those conversations not a joke on Twitter about the Packers. That's a legitimate discussion that is happening in the front office right now. He looks like a roster contributor, especially when you factor in the 4 phases of special teams.
We only have you for a few minutes here, Greg, so I quickly want to touch on the defensive line, particularly the younger guys on the defensive line, AJ Epinesa and Greg Rousseau. They're getting a lot of hype here early in camp. What did you see from them on Saturday?
So both of them were impressive in what you saw. I'll start with Epinesa. Really quick first step. Off the ball really fast. Good flexibility, dipping his shoulder and getting around the corner. Battles against both Darrell Williams, Spencer Brown, Bobby Hart, different guys. Obviously, every time I tweeted it, I said, anytime it involves Bobby Hart, take it with a grain of salt. It's not all that impressive. But it was other guys as well, other people that they were making moves on. Tommy Doyle got abused on a few reps. Gregory Rousseau, the part that I was really excited about was, everything we heard was how raw he was. And yeah, he's big and long, but he doesn't really know what to do. That was not what I saw. Like, you saw a guy able to use his length, able to swipe hands off, able to have counter moves and quick footwork to be able to change direction, able to play games with the tackle. And all of these things need to be taken with the caveat that pads don't fully come on for the first time until tomorrow. But, these are professionals. They had the shells on. That they were going at a full pace when they were going through this. So for everything that we had heard was Carlos Basham is more ready to contribute, and he's almost 3 full years older than Rousseau and much more experienced. He's going to be ready to contribute early, and Rousseau's the project. Gregory Rousseau looked excellent. Like, he looked really, really exciting. So obviously need to see that continue there. But I know, reading a report from Joe Buscaglia today, talked about a previous one earlier in the week. Matt Perino made the comment, I actually made a conscious effort not to talk about Gregory Rousseau because I already had, but he forced me to again. Today, Buscaglia's comment was, it didn't matter who he's going up against. Today, it was 3 reps, just whipping Spencer Brown. And when you see that constant drumbeat from both Epinesa and Rousseau, I mean, that should be music to Bills fans' ears. That is exactly what we're hoping for, is that Hughes and Addison can be the contributors, and we have 2 young, difference makers here. And I will say, a lot of people have asked, I didn't notice Carlos Basham. He didn't stand out in any negative way, but he's the kind of guy that I have a feeling when pads come on and he can start kicking in interior and using that power, that's more of where he would stand out. So I'm not concerned about that, but it just, Epinesa and Rousseau over and over again were noticeable.
And that's promising to hear. Obviously, like you said, against Bobby Hart, you got to take it with a grain of salt, but Rousseau, I mean, this is a guy, like you said, that was raw coming in. And to hear him making plays every single practice so far, I mean, I don't think Bills fans could ask for much more.
Yeah. You talk about how excited people are with the athleticism of Spencer Brown. When somebody's beating that kind of athlete around the corner or with quick footwork and counter moves, that should ring a bell for somebody. That should set off some fun alarms.
Absolutely.
Rob, do you have any last questions here for Greg before we let him return to his family?
I don't. I'll let you handle
Appreciate it,
all
guys.
those issues.
All right.
Thanks for coming on, Greg.
Really, really excited for everything you guys have going. Looking forward to episode 2 and many, many more. So best of luck.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. All
right. So that was Greg Thompson. We have a super chat here from John DeMarchi. Thank you. I'm going to assume that's how you pronounce it. If it's not, I apologize. Thank you so much, John. He says, best Bills content. He must be talking about the Cover One podcast. Can't be talking about this one. Best Bills pod or best Bills content. 1, starting offensive line left to right predictions. 2, I stand for Rousseau pre-draft. How does he look? 3, F.A. Obata is going to make the roster. Yes. 4, Horrible Harry. How is our guy? He pretty much just summed up the rest of the show in one question here. These are all questions. I don't think we're going to answer them right now, but we will answer them throughout the rest of the show, I am sure. But before we get into that, it's time for everyone's favorite segment on the Cover One Roundup podcast. It's the Roundup. I just had a speech, slurred my speech. The Roundup, where we just quickly go over the latest and greatest news and rumors surrounding the Buffalo Bills and quickly give our opinions on said news items. And this week, unfortunately, I don't know if it's going to be a quick one because I have some opinions. A report yesterday from the Buffalo News, Jason Wolf, published an article basically saying that the Pagula Sports and Entertainment, are in talks with the state and the county regarding a potential new stadium in Orchard Park, which, of course, is where it's Highmark Stadium now, which, of course, is where Highmark Stadium is right now. And the new stadium, there are rumors that it's going to be close to the current site of Highmark Stadium. The big news of this report is that the initial proposal calls for 100% of the stadium to be funded by taxpayer dollars, which is nearly unprecedented in the world of stadium building. And also included in that was a little tidbit that the Pagulas have made it clear that, hey, there are other cities that would like a football team. Buffalo's not the only city that wants a football team, and then it later came out via an ESPN reporter that Austin, Texas, is kind of being used as leverage. I have opinions on this, just as a lot of Bills Twitter had opinions on this. So before I get into those, Rob, you sent out a tweet yesterday that kind of makes me think we're not like on differing ends of the spectrum here, but we can have a discussion on this. So what's your initial take on this whole saga right now?
So obviously when something of this nature comes out in the news, Bills Twitter goes into a frenzy, and rightfully so. I mean, you have billionaires asking for money to facilitate a property that's going to make them more money. But when you look at the NFL and the stadiums that have been built, public financing is a prerequisite of that for the most part. Obviously, the Rams Stadium was fully privately financed by Stan Kroenke. There's a few others that were mostly privately financed, but for the most part, you're getting public funding. And I think in the Bills case that it's going to have to be. And the taxpayers are going to have to foot the bill for a lot of this. And now the Pagulas, obviously it's not a good look from a PR standpoint for them, but I mean, you're seeing it. It's the beginning of a negotiation, and you're going to shoot for the moon and hopefully settle somewhere very below that. So I think in the case of the Bills Stadium, I think the Pagulas are going to pay probably 50, if not more % of that. But you're going to ask for 100%. I mean, why would you not? Obviously, the threat of losing the Bills is huge to Bills fans. It's the scars from the potential Toronto move are still fresh, and it's an emotional time for Bills fans. I mean, the team's just turning a corner, so they're kind of pulling at the heartstrings of there. But then you have reports coming out from the New York State lieutenant governor, and she's saying that the number one priority is to keep the Bills in Buffalo. It is the only team in New York State. So I think it is a priority of the state to get this done, and something will happen. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say, because I know that we're not on the same page completely here.
No, I agree with basically everything you said. Like, I definitely think if you're doing a negotiation, you have to start somewhere. So why not start at 100%? You know, why not just see like, hey, can we get them to pay for everything? And Terry Pagula is not a dumb man. So the Pegula family is not dumb. So obviously, in a negotiation like this, you shoot for the moon, like you said. But my issue is the ask just kind of comes off as tone deaf to me. It kind of comes off as a lack of ability or just an unwillingness to read the room. So obviously there's going to be public funding. Is it going to be 100%? No, the taxpayers are not going to pay for 100%. Terry Pegula knows that. But to start at 100% after the year that the world just came off and the year that Buffalo and Erie County and the Buffalo Niagara area in general just came off. There are numerous reports, investigations, stuff like that, that suggest or prove that Buffalo was one of the hardest hit cities economically by COVID, by the pandemic, by the circumstances of last year. There's a report from the Investigative Post. Sorry, I'm looking down. I'm reading this. There was a article from the Investigative Post, which is a local kind of news outlet, that said that the workforce in Buffalo Niagara was at a 30-year low last year. So the economy isn't great. And Buffalo is already one of the smallest markets in the NFL. If you eliminate Green Bay, or if you include Milwaukee and Green Bay, Buffalo is the smallest market in the NFL. So in your initial ask, after the year that we just went through, to say, oh yeah, we want 100%, it's like, yeah, I know why you did it, but I don't have to like it. And obviously that's not how it's going to end up. There's going to be a compromise. Like, I think 50-50. I think Pegula would ultimately be, I don't know if he'd be happy with 50-50, but I think he would take 50-50. But
absolutely.
that's just me being, hopeful, I guess. But just like, yeah, obviously it's gonna get done. The Bills aren't leaving. The Bills aren't going to Austin, Texas. I mean, that's right. It's the new leverage city. It's the new LA. Just right. Because Austin.
Pro Football Talk already published something. They spoke to the city council members there, and they said they had no idea what they were talking about in relation to the Bills. So that's a tidbit of information there. Obviously, you want to have as much leverage as possible. And I completely agree with what you're saying about the year that New York State has had, being hit so hard by COVID and really decimating the economy and the timing of this. But it's a discussion that's going to be had. And I think, and I agree, it's a little bit tone deaf. And like I said, it was a bad PR move. But you got to put all your cards on the table right away, and you can't really weaken your initial stance in a negotiation like this, I don't think.
Oh, 100%. Again, I know why he did it, and everything that people are saying, I agree with. I just personally think it comes off poorly. It's kind of not a PR. I'll say it's a PR nightmare, because you saw the reaction to it. You saw the Bills Twitter yesterday. Every time they tweeted something, people were tweeting about Austin, and just, there was an old tweet about Austin, Texas, that a Cover One Slack member, it was a tweet about Austin, Texas to him, and then people found it and were retweeting it and stuff. But just like, obviously it's a negotiation. There are people commenting right now saying it's a negotiation. Yes. But like, it still can come off bad. It still doesn't look great. Like, even if it would have been like 90-10, I would have had issues with it, because I would find a way to have issues with pretty much everything. But like 90-10 isn't 100%. It's not 100-0. Like, I could be like, okay, he's still going to devote some of his own money. He's still going to devote some of his $5 billion to this stadium. But and again, he's ultimately the team's not going anywhere. This will get figured out. It's just not a great initial look for me. And it just shows that this is going to get ugly, I think, over the next couple of years. It'll get done, but we'll see, how many broken hearts are made along the way.
I can't argue with that.
All right. So now, what the people actually tuned in for, it's training camp talk. We're going to look at the storylines. Which is, no, I'm looking at the wrong thing. My bad. We're going to talk about the standouts from training camp. We're doing great here. We're going to talk about the standouts from the first week of training camp. Obviously, again, as Greg said, pads aren't on yet. Everyone looks good in shorts, but we're going to talk about the standouts from the first week here. And then we'll get into our surprises, and then we'll quickly go over the position battle, see if there's any, any headway being made there by anyone in any of the position battles on this roster. And then we will close it off with some hot takes. I don't know if anyone just saw that, but spit just came out of my mouth. So that was probably a wonderful sight for our wonderful viewers. So, Rob, we'll start with you. Who's your standout from the first week of training camp?
I think it has to be Jake Kumerow, and we talked about him with Greg, but the amount of attention that he's gotten, and when you think about Isaiah Hodgins being the training camp darling that everyone was talking about prior to camp starting, and him really going largely unnoticed, I think you have to give credit to Kumerow where it's due. Saturday, he got the opportunity to shine with Stephon Diggs taking a rest day, and he really made the most out of that opportunity, catching several impressive passes that we saw online, a touchdown in the end zone and on a deep crosser against Levi Wallace, where he just made a tough grab in traffic and then waltzed into the end zone. But Kumerow is a guy that's very interesting, and we talked about him last week in that battle for the sixth receiver spot. And I think that if he can continue this play into training camp and Hodgins sticks with the 2s and the 3s as he has been thus far, then Hodgins is going to get released and Kumerow will have a spot on this team. They've talked about him playing all 4 phases of special teams, which is huge when you're talking about bottom of the roster receiver, because as good as he has been on the field in the offense, that's not the role he's going to play in the regular season unless something goes drastically wrong or he's playing late in the game. So the amount that the Bills are using him early on and giving him those key reps, I think are going to go a long, long way.
Yeah, you say that we talked about Kumerow last week. I'll fully admit I really didn't talk about Kumerow. I brought up the receiving core and how the battle at the bottom of the receiving core was going to be fun to watch, and I basically left Kumerow out of the discussion. I said that Hodgins was basically a roster lock, and the real battle for that last roster spot was between Isaiah McKenzie and Marquez Stevenson. I think I said in the podcast they should just see if they can trade Kumerow back to Green Bay. Obviously, again, we're a week in, but it looks like, again, I was wrong. That's going to be a recurring theme in this podcast, that I was wrong in this episode and on this podcast in general. But Jake Kumerow has been the standout, at least offensively, throughout this first portion of training camp here. Sorry, there's something outside my room. So if you hear that, apologies. I should probably get sound stuff on the wall. But yeah, Jake Kumerow has looked very good throughout this first week of training camp, as you said, really stepping up when Stephon Diggs had an off day, and kind of, with the 18,000 fans in attendance, showing that he should be on this roster as a bottom of the roster guy, or a bottom of the receiving core guy. And then, as you said, playing on all, 4 phases of special teams, that is huge. That alone could probably win him a roster spot. And then doing what he's done offensively is just really good. And Isaiah Hodgins, from what I've read, really didn't flash until today. He had a nice catch today from on a pass from Mitch Trubisky, which went for a touchdown, I believe. But until then, Isaiah Hodgins really hadn't flashed. So when you're a guy like Isaiah Hodgins and you come in not as a roster lock, but as a roster favorite, as like not a soft lock, but you come in as a guy who people think it's gonna take a big effort from someone else in order to get you off the roster. And through 1 week, it's looking like that's happening, because Jake Kumerow has been the talk and Isaiah Hodgins really hasn't shown up. We'll see what happens. There's still 3 preseason games to be played, but it'll be fun to see if Kumerow can continue this, and if he is a guy who they keep on the roster, or if they trade him, like I said, if they are able to swing a trade for like a day 2 pick from Green Bay. So anything there before we move on to my standout player?
Take it away.
Oh, this is a big one. This is what the people tuned in for. Let me get my notes. My standout player from week 1 of training camp is Greg Rousseau, the Bills' first-round pick, 30th overall, the pass rusher out of the U, Rob's favorite school. Rob's favorite player, Greg Rousseau.
He's getting there.
You and I had similar opinions on Greg Rousseau coming out of college, in that we weren't over the moon about Greg Rousseau. Am I correct in remembering that?
You're correct. I mean, I wasn't super high on him. I wasn't terribly low on him, but he was kind of like a meh to me. I thought he was raw. I thought he had the measurables, but I like pass rushers that have the juice and the bend, but the Bills seem to want more of those power and length guys. And if he fits in their scheme, he fits in their scheme.
Yep. So Greg Rousseau, to me, coming out of Miami, he was more of a a project, like you said, more of a looks good as opposed to like the tapes there. He was more of a stats guy than he, you look at his stats, you look at 15.5 sacks in his freshman or sophomore year, whatever it was. It's like, oh, that's big. That'll really help the Bills. And you watch the tape and it's like, 15.5 sacks looks more impressive than what this is. Again, not saying he wasn't impressive, but when you look at how he got his sacks, stuff like that, it left a little bit to be desired. So, and again, you hear everything about Greg Rousseau, like he was the rawer prospect between he and Carlos Basham coming out, that Greg Rousseau, I honestly thought going into this year that he was going to be like the 4th or 5th defensive end used in turbo packages, used as a rotational pass rusher from more likely the inside than the outside, which that might still end up being his role. But through the first week, we are seeing that he can be more than just like a fun piece, more than just like a nice little defensive secret X factor. He can be a guy who you play on like maybe 30 or 40% of snaps. I don't think he's supplanting Hughes. I don't think he's supplanting Addison. But on a defensive line rotation with Rousseau and Epinesa, who's also looked great, as Greg said, through this first part of camp, that's going to be fun. So Rousseau had a little bit of first-team action last week in positional drills. That's mainly due to the fact that Jerry Hughes is out on the non-football injury list. But again, there's 3 other guys who could, or at least 1 or 2 other guys who could be getting those first-team reps in positional drills, and Rousseau's getting them. He's looked good from what I've read. Greg said he looked great on Saturday, and every other day he's looked great. Sacked, he's tallied a few sacks, had a sack again today. And Leslie Frazier has been praising his mentality, praising his work ethic, saying he's been coming in. He and Carlos Basham came in hungry, eager to learn the defense in minicamp, and that mindset is carried through. Physically imposing. Micah Hyde said that he couldn't believe he was that tall, which sounds stupid, but that does do something, right? Where it's like you're an offensive lineman and you see the 6'7" guy just towering over you. You're anywhere and you see a 6'7" guy towering over you. You're like, oh, that's a tall human being. There's just that aspect of it. So Greg Rousseau has looked good, and it's reassuring, I think. Again, it's another I was wrong thing. I didn't know if he could play in a significant role this year. Still don't know if he can. Again, we're a week into training camp. We still have the rest of training camp. We still have preseason, and then we still have the regular season. But it looks like he's playing himself into an opportunity to get those snaps. He's placing himself in a position to be in that role, to be in a more significant role, which is more than I thought he would be in this year. So it's just that's why he's my standout through this first week, because he's already showing that, hey, I should raise my expectations for him a little bit in year 1. He's not just a measurables guy, not just a size guy. He can actually go.
For sure. And for somebody who was originally going to probably be running with the second team for a lot of training camp as they worked him into a role, I mean, Jerry Hughes having that calf injury and being on the non-football injury list was amazing for him. And he took that opportunity and he's running with it, and he's proving that he can handle NFL offensive linemen. I mean, Darrell Williams had a great season last year, and he's been routinely beating him throughout these practices in the last week. So for me, I'm glad, and I hope that trajectory continues upwards, and I hope to be proven wrong on him. And it seems like I already am.
Yes, sorry, I muted my mic because my dogs are barking. Anyone who listened to the Kyle Silagyi Variety Hour, this is just a return to form for them. They know the chaos that was that podcast. So yeah, I agree. I think and Carlos Basham had a nice little a nice play from what I've read, from what I've seen, from what I've heard. Leslie Frazier talked about it, that it's nice that I think he tipped the ball, and then he intercepted his own tip, and then he returned that tip for a touchdown. So Carlos Basham, as Greg said, not really flashing necessarily in either way, but flashed on that play. Micah Hyde, again, praised him. So it's nice. Leslie Frazier talked about how length could be that missing piece for this Bills defensive line in terms of production. I wrote an article last week about the defensive line and Leslie Frazier's comments. I don't know how I missed this stat. The Bills blitzed the most out of any team in the NFL last year by like 15 or 20 blitzes, and they still finished in like the bottom third of the league in sacks. So there's some missing piece there, and Frazier and Bean obviously think it was length, which, with Obata and Rousseau, and then Basham, not the tallest guy, but a bigger dude. So I hope that was the missing piece, and that we do see that production, those blitzes turn into actual production this year. So I think that wraps it up for our standout players here, Rousseau and Kumerow. Sounds like a good little, duo there. That could be a nice band name. So we're now moving on to our training camp surprises, things that have surprised us from the first week of training camp. Rob, what's your biggest surprise from the first week?
Coming up with surprises, I think we all kind of knew what to expect in all these position battles, but one of the biggest surprises to me is Levi Wallace really holding on to that number 2 job and not really giving up any reps to Dane Jackson. A lot of people were high on Dane Jackson, just like they were with Isaiah Hodgins. Those were kind of the 2 breakout candidates on this team. And I think that Levi Wallace is just once again proving why he's been able to hold on to that spot. Now he's had to really hold on tight as they brought in competition for him every single year, but he's consistent, and where Jackson may have more athleticism and a little better ball skills and some size to him, Wallace is consistent and technically sound, and in a zone defense that McDermott and Frazier run, that's what you ask for, especially when you have a guy like Tre'Davious White locking down one side. You need to have someone who can play consistent coverage on the opposite side of the field, and that's what Wallace brings. And he's tenacious, and he gets the job done. Jackson last year, he played well, and he had some splash plays, but he also got beat a lot and was very up and down. And you'll expect that from a 7th-round rookie. But for a team that's contending for a Super Bowl, you don't want to give up a guy that's had 4 or 3 strong seasons in a defense and just give the reins to a second-year corner who's only played a few games. So I think Jackson will start to probably get some reps in that area as training camp goes on. But I think Wallace, it's his job to lose.
Oh, for sure. I think that the Bills like Levi Wallace more than Bills Twitter and Bills fans like Levi Wallace. That's clear that they're perfectly comfortable with him being that number 2 guy. They bring in competition for him, but it's always like redemption stories. It's always just like, okay, if this pops off, great. If not, we're more than comfortable with Levi. Like Kevin Johnson 2 years ago, former 1st-round pick. Let's see if he has anything left. And he did. He was a good player, but Levi, for the most part, held on to that job. Josh Norman last year. Again, he was once the best corner in the league under McDermott. Let's see if he can replicate that. Couldn't. They were more than comfortable with Levi. This year, Dane Jackson showed promise. Let's see, if he can push Levi. If he can't, we're more than happy with Levi. So Levi Wallace, people have been hyping up this competition. If Dane Jackson flashes, great. If not, Levi Wallace is fine. Regardless of what Bill's Twitter says, the Bills coaching staff, I think, is more than comfortable heading into this season with Levi Wallace as the number 2 corner opposite Trey White. Aaron Quinn, if you're listening, eat your heart out right now. He's big Levi Wallace guy, from what I understand. So I'm a bigger Lafayette Pitts guy. I don't know if you guys can read in the background. I have a whiteboard that says Lafayette Pitts is making the 53. He's got to get signed first, but if he does, it'll happen. I promise. But yeah, that's my take on Levi Wallace. Is that I think his lead in that competition was larger than people gave it credit for entering camp, and we're seeing that now. So my surprise from the first week of training camp, and I shouldn't be surprised. I should have more confidence in Brandon Beane, in Brian Dable, etc. But my surprise from week 1, mainly because I couldn't think of anything else, is just how nicely Emmanuel Sanders is fitting into this offense. Obviously, we all have, scenarios. We all think this free agent acquisition or this guy that we traded or that the Bills traded for is going to fit in like a glove. He's going to, it's going to be great. It's going to, go swimmingly. Doesn't always go like that. Kelvin Benjamin, but who also just got cut, that's a story. But With Emmanuel Sanders, again, we all thought like, oh, he's going to come in, he's going to bring that pedigree to the locker room. He wants another Super Bowl, so he's going to come in and be that guy who has been to a Super Bowl, who helps the younger guys realize what needs to be done in order to win a Super Bowl or to get to a Super Bowl. I mean, he's been to 3. And he's also going to be impactful on the field. He's still got juice. He's still got it in him. But you need to get out there in order to see if that can happen. And through the first week of training camp, it looks like that is happening. Sean McDermott, in one of his press conferences, talked about Emmanuel Sanders already bringing that championship pedigree. Josh Allen said that they're already developing a nice rapport, nice chemistry, already, getting some on-field communication stuff down. Cole Beasley was complimentary of Emmanuel Sanders, which, I mean, he's going to be, they go back, 10 years? So, again, it's just, I shouldn't be surprised at this point, just because this regime has shown that they are more than competent throughout the last 4 or 5 years they've been here. But just as someone who has watched the Bills for a long time, the best case scenario doesn't usually happen. We never get scenarios where it's like, oh, if everything works out, this will be great, and it doesn't go like that. Like Stephon Diggs last year with Josh Allen. Josh Allen is the perfect example of that, where it's like, oh, he's a project, but if he works out, oh boy, well, we're at that point. Stephon Diggs, oh, he doesn't have a lot of time to learn the offense, but if he works out, oh boy, and we got to that point. And with Emmanuel Sanders, it's already looking like we are getting to that point. He brings something different to the offense than John Brown, so it's going to be interesting to see how the offensive identity shifts at all, if at all. So I'm interested to see. We're not going to see much of him in the preseason, so I am more so interested to see come week 1 if this hype is real, if Emmanuel Sanders really is fitting in like a glove culturally and on the field, what he can do for Josh Allen.
Yeah, totally. And I think culturally he's fitting right in because everyone has that same mentality in the locker room. It's not like in years past when the team didn't know how to win or even what winning looked like. So you have a guy who's been to 3 Super Bowls, who has consistently been on winning teams with star quarterbacks. And I think he fits right in. And for the younger guys, he's just another mentor in the room for them. I mean, Gabe Davis, a lot of people saw him being that breakout player this year in his second year, but now he's that number 4 guy, and you hear him talking and he's really looking up to Sanders and like appreciating the opportunity to learn from a guy like that. And Brian Dable talked about that earlier today, even saying that when Sanders had his day off today, Davis can fit right in. So you look at a guy like that and just what he brings to the offense. Like you said, he's different than John Brown. He's not going to give you that deep speed, but I think they'll use Davis for that role, and Sanders could fit right in. He plays outside in the slot with all the different personnel groupings and looks that Brian Dable likes to throw at defenses. I don't think you could ask for a better receiver. I mean, it's a perfect piece of the puzzle right now.
Yeah, right now is a good key or a good point there, because I think they brought him in at the perfect time. Because right. Emmanuel Sanders, everyone who follows the Bills knows that the Bills have been linked to Emmanuel Sanders a lot. Reportedly tried to get him at the 2019 trade deadline, didn't go through. I think he ended up in San Francisco, if I remember correctly. Last offseason, they were in talks with Emmanuel Sanders, but ultimately they trade for Stephon Diggs. So this is a player that they've been after for a long time. And now, when it finally comes together, when Emmanuel Sanders finally does land in Buffalo, it's with him searching for that second Super Bowl, for that 4th Super Bowl appearance and that second Super Bowl win. And he's entering a team that was so close to the Super Bowl last year that feels as though it should have made the Super Bowl, that wasn't pleased with how it performed in the AFC Championship game, and is hungry to get back there, prove that that was a fluke and that they can make it to that next game. So Emmanuel Sanders being there to help lead the way, to help be the guy who can, tell the younger guys what it takes to do that, it's just perfect timing. So, Rob, according to the outline, you have another surprise, a second surprise?
Yeah, I think there was going to be more competition for the 5th receiver role. Last week we went in deep with Isaiah McKenzie and Marquez Stevenson, and it doesn't even seem like Stevenson's really an option right now. McKenzie's looked great in practices and probably has a stranglehold on that number 5 spot because he's doing the punt returns as well. Stevenson got a little action in punt, as did Brandon Powell. But right now, Stevenson looks like a guy who they might stash on the practice squad because McKenzie's here on a 1-year deal, and he's looked good. He knows the offense, and he has a little bit of experience returning punts. So I think that was a surprise that didn't really develop into the competition many of us thought it would. But obviously, there's 3 preseason games to go where we'll see that develop a little bit more.
Yeah, it's early. But I think I hyped up last week. I was like, Marquez Stevenson just has to be comparable to Isaiah McKenzie, and it's his job because he's got the term, he's got the contract. You know, they don't have to pay Marquez Stevenson at the end of the year, whereas they would with McKenzie. But I mean, that is starting to look like a media created competition because Stevenson, he's just been getting special teams reps. He really hasn't made an impact offensively, whereas Isaiah McKenzie has had opportunities offensively, and he's making the most of them. So, I mean, that competition, it might have been wrapped up before it even started. Again, 3, rest of camp to go, 3 preseason games to go, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. If there is a competition, how that competition plays out. So now the position battle roundup, we have the Roundup name and we put it to use. we put that Roundup name to use here. Position battle roundup. Obviously, training camp is fun because there's position battles, jobs to be won, jobs to be lost. So now we will quickly go over, not quickly, we got time. We got like 20 minutes left here. So we will go over the position battles and we will say our takes on who's winning so far or who it looks like is winning, etc. So the running back room, obviously going to be done by committee, but someone's got to start the games. Unless, they come out there in 20 personnel, you come out with Singletary and Moss, which would be fun. Or go 30, go crazy, go wishbone, go with a wishbone offense. No, but someone's got to start. Someone's got to get, the reps to start the game. So that competition is between Zach Moss and Devin Singletary and Matt Breida, my guy Matt Breida, having a nice little week there. So, Rob, what's your take on the running back battle through the first week?
It sounds like Zach Moss has been getting most of the touches with the first team offense, but obviously it's going to be a running back by committee. And Sal Capaccio even put it great today, saying it'll be a running back by game plan. And I think that makes a lot of sense because with the different personnel groupings that Buffalo wants to run, obviously they can do a little bit different things with the Zach Moss than they can with a Devin Singletary, who's more of an elusive outside the tackles runner, where Moss is that downhill pounder. Moss talked about his rehab and how he kind of is getting his feet under him still. And once the pads come on, it'll be a big test for him to see how he responds to just getting hit. Because he kind of had to rebuild his calf muscles and legs, as he said, after the ankle surgery and rehabbing all offseason. So to see where he's at right now, I think is promising. And then Matt Breida, I think, sounds like a lock for this roster. I mean, Brandon Beane talked about him this morning, saying that he had a lot of juice and he brought an element to the team that they didn't really have. And before the draft, he talked about needing that home run hitter at the running back position, and Breida can be that guy. Now, he's not going to be that Alvin Kamara superstar home run hitter, but when you're looking for a role player on offense that can score from anywhere on the field and in limited touches, that's Matt Breida. And then Brian Dable was asked what he brings to the offense, and he simply said speed. And so I think these 3 jobs are locked in. And then also Taiwan Jones was called an elite gunner. So I think we're going to have 4 running backs on the roster, probably depending on the game plan. We'll see how many are dressed, but I think those are your top 3 with Taiwan Jones rounding the group out.
I love to hear that because last week,
big Taiwan Jones fan,
huge Taiwan Jones fan, obviously dating back years. But with Matt Breida, I mean, last week I was kind of banging the table for Matt Breida, saying I like Matt Breida. I think he could have a fun role in this offense. I just don't know if they're going to do it. Lone Wolf writes, I like Breida's speed, but vision has questionable trait. I think he has real good vision. I watched a bunch of Matt Breida film for what was going to be an article for Cover One. Never turned into anything, unfortunately. But I think Matt Breida has nice vision. I don't know if he's a every down back. I don't know. He's not going to supplant Zach Moss. He's not going to supplant Devin Singletary. But in a rotational role and out of the backfield type guy who you just get the ball to in space, I like Matt Breida a bunch. But again, I don't know if there's going to be many games where they're dressing 4 running backs, including Taiwan Jones as a special teamer. But we talked last week about like if Matt Breida is going to make the roster, it'll probably be at the expense of an Isaiah McKenzie or Marquez Stevenson. But we saw McKenzie kind of, put a firmer lock on his roster status this week. So it's going to be interesting. I like Matt Breida. I'm still not at roster lock territory with Matt Breida yet, but I'd like to be. I'd like Matt Breida to make this roster. I think he brings a fun element, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. There's only one ball. There's only so many snaps to go around. There's only so many snaps in a game. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We already talked a little bit about the wide receiver room, the bottom of the depth chart with Kumerow and McKenzie kind of coming out as the top guys so far, with Hodgins not necessarily being the odd man out so far, but he has some ground to make up on Jake Kumerow. And then Marquez Stevenson not really doing anything of note. Anything to add on the receiver room?
No, I think we touched on everything, but looking ahead to the offensive line, I think that a lot of guys are getting opportunities to get some meaningful snaps, especially with Deion Dawkins and Ike Butker out with COVID. We've seen Spencer Brown, Bobby Hart, and guys like that really get some meaningful reps. And Bobby Hart running at the second team left tackle is pretty scary to hear. And he's really been a liability throughout his entire career. And it sounds like he's just picking up right where he left off from his time in Cincinnati, getting just absolutely abused by AJ Epinesa every chance he gets. But as far as the offensive line goes, Cody Ford is someone that I pretty much trashed in our opening episode.
You did. You didn't pretty much. You fully did.
But one of the things that I said last week was that the Bills are going to give Ford every chance to lose the job, while other guys are going to have to really fight to win that. And I think we're seeing that now as he's getting pretty much all the first team reps at right guard. The team is really standing behind him. You see Brandon Beane and Brian Dable really talking him up. And it remains to be seen exactly what he will be in the NFL, because he's had 2 seasons that have been marred by injury. Mm-hmm. But obviously the team really likes what they have in him. And to hear him talk about like the mental stuff he went through with dealing with injuries, as he's never dealt with injuries before in his career, was interesting to hear. But at the end of the day, he needs to show up on the field and prove why the team really traded up in the second round to draft him, because he hasn't been able to do that yet.
Cody Ford. You'll hear my Cody Ford hot take later. Spoiler: that's my hot take this week. But with the offensive line, for me, it's kind of hard to get a read on the whole thing with Deion Dawkins being out and Ike Butker being out, because we thought that this was kind of brought up last week. It kind of looked like Ike Butker really was one of the favorites to win one of the jobs, and obviously we haven't seen him play because he's on the COVID list. So again, with a Bobby Hart, flanked offensive line, results are kind of to be taken with a grain of salt. But it's been interesting to see Ford and Feliciano switch, because usually Ford last year played primarily a left guard. Feliciano's been a right guard. He's taken the majority of his snaps at right guard throughout his Bills career, a little bit at center, but majority has been at right guard. So to see him at left it's interesting. But that I want to save my Ford stuff for the hot take. So I'm going to move on to the defensive line. Star Lotulelei is back. He's looking slim. He is looking good. Carlos Basham's making plays. Harrison Phillips. We had a question about Harrison Phillips earlier. So Rob, I stuttered like a madman last week when talking about the defensive line. I'm not going to allow myself to do it again. So I'll go to you here. How do you feel about the defensive line, specifically Starr and Harrison? That was your hot take last week.
That was my hot take last week.
All right, so how's that looking?
We haven't really heard much out of Harrison Phillips throughout training camp, but we have heard a lot about Star Latulelei's return. If you watched Ed Oliver's press conference, he was smiling ear to ear about him and what he brings to the defense, what he's going to allow him to do. Tremaine Edmonds, the same. Obviously, he didn't want to place blame on anybody else for his struggles last season. But obviously, we all know that having a quality one technique nose guard in there is going to free up your three technique and middle linebacker. It's just how the game works. And Star Latulila's return is really huge for this team. Last week, maybe my take was a little too hot, stating that Harrison Phillips could overtake Star by the middle of the season. We don't know that. But Justin Zimmer's having a great camp too, and I think that he's a guy to keep an eye on. Leslie Frazier said it's going to be really tough to get rid of him. So this is a battle that's really heating up behind Ed Oliver and Star Lotulelei, is who is going to be that number 3 and number 4 defensive tackle, because Vernon Butler is also an interesting case as he restructured his contract to remain in Buffalo. But as far as the reps are going, it seems like he's running with the threes at this point. So if he gets released, it wouldn't be that big of a surprise to me.
Yep, and then they have 5 defensive ends who are locks. And then if you want to throw Obata in there, you got 3 guys who can kick in to defensive tackle on obvious passing downs. So it's going to be interesting with Vernon Butler for sure, and just the whole competition behind the two starters there. So looking past that, to the back of the front 7, the back 3 of the front 7. I can't piece that together. Edmonds, Tremaine Edmonds, from all intents and purposes, looking pretty good. What else is going on there? Tyler Matakevich and Andre Smith are with the second team you wrote down?
Yep, that's from all the reports that I've seen. It's been Andre Smith and Tyler Matakevich.
But why?
I'm not sure. I mean, Tyrell Adams and AJ Klein, I thought would have a bigger chance.
Tyrell Dodson
as well. Yep. But Joe Marino on Locked On Bill said something interesting that I heard him talk about this morning with Matakevich. And he was talking about him being pretty much a special teams lock. Yep. And with him playing with the second string, they might just want to see if he's capable of actually suiting up on the field when it comes down to the numbers for linebackers that you're going to keep, whether you want to talk 4 or 5 on game day. It's going to come down to who can not only play special teams, but fill in case of an injury to Matt Milano or Tremaine Edmonds. So it's something to keep an eye on. Obviously very early, no pads yet. And that's where linebackers really make their money, is getting the pads popping. But right now it's been Andre Smith and Tyler Matakevich as running with the 2s.
That's interesting. Those are 2 guys we were not talking about in the linebacker battle to ramp up training camp here. But Joe Marino, smart guy, usually makes good points, and that seems like another good point there with just see if they can bring anything on the field, Matakevich specifically. But I was high on Tyrell Dodson coming into this camp. Aaron Quinn says, I love these guys. Again, you're at the wrong podcast. you can't be talking about us simply. But I was high on Tyrell Dodson. I talked to Tyrell Dodson for a piece on Cover One a month ago, maybe month and a half ago. I don't remember, but seems like he's grown. Seems like he's matured a bit in his time in Buffalo. And he two-sport athlete, yes, wants to play a Warzone professionally. And he, at times, he flashed when he was on the field last year, playing in place of Tremaine Edmonds, specifically early in the season. Dodson dealt with some injury stuff later in the year. But Dodson didn't look out of place, in my opinion, when he did have to play. So to see him not getting run with the 2s to start camp here is strange. I don't want to say it's disheartening. It's just a bit strange. So we'll see what changes as time progresses here, as camp progresses. But I thought Dodson was a near roster lock. He is a teamer. He said he wants to make that Tyler Matakevich money. Because that's another thing. They're paying Tyler Matakevich how much, and if he can't be on the field. So we're moving on now. I think if that wraps up position battles. Any other position battle that we need to touch on before we move on to hot takes?
No, I think we talked about everything so far with corners, as far as Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson. One thing to touch on at the cornerback position, though, is Saran Neal. He got a lot of praise last week from not only Leslie Frazier, but Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, who called him probably the most gifted athlete they've ever played with, which is rather high praise. For a guy like Saran Neal, who's made his money on special teams. But Leslie Frazier said something interesting, that they've been trying to carve a rollout for him on defense, but Taron Johnson's just been unable to give up his spot because he's playing too well. But Neal is a guy that's always intrigued me, and I've probably put him on my breakout player list for the last 2 or 3 seasons now. And it might be the time this year because Taron Johnson, while everyone knows that pick 6 against the Ravens, he struggled at the beginning of last season, even lost his job, came back and won it back and played well down the stretch. But I don't think that he really has a stranglehold on that as much as we think he does. And if he starts to play inconsistently, I think Siran Neal is a guy who's been here long enough and knows the defense in and out, can play almost any position on it. And he could be a guy that fills in nicely for this team. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to be a Pro Bowler, but I think he's a guy to watch and see how they use him, not only in the preseason, but what his role is in the early regular season.
Yeah, if you follow me on Twitter, you know my takes on Taron Johnson, which is funny because his rookie year, I loved Taron Johnson. Last year, he was probably my most criticized Bill. I had one tweet where I was pretty proud of it. It was like Taron Johnson just came screaming off the edge, similarly to how I scream every time he's on the field, which is that's a solid tweet. No, that's a solid 7 out of 10 for the kid. But yeah, Siran Neal, always an intriguing athlete, always an intriguing skill set, has been since he arrived in 2018, always been intrigued to see how they would use him defensively. They really haven't. But that was his thing coming out of Jacksonville State, I believe, is he was a linebacker safety hybrid, tried him at safety a bit in the league, and then kind of moved him to nickel full time. So it'll be interesting to see if this is the year that they carve out the role for him defensively. And that offseason hype machine is kind of behind him right now. He's kind of is the recipient of the offseason rub, being called the most athletic player that Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer have ever played with. They've played with Phillip Gaines. They've played with Vontae Davis. That's a long list of elite athletes that these guys have played with. And Siran Neal tops the list. So that's big for Siran Neal. It'll be, I'm intrigued. I'm interested to see how Siran Neal factors into this team defensively. So now moving on to wrap up this week's edition of the Cover One Roundup. It is the hot take segment, everyone's favorite segment. It's where we give our hot takes that we reserve the right to change. We reserve the right to change our hot takes when new information is presented. So I will start with the hot takes. Sorry, Rob, I got to cut you in line here.
No, you're good.
My hot take is that Cody Ford does not start week 1 and is instead used in like a Ryan Bates-esque role in that he's the backup for, like 3 of the positions. I saw a tweet from Pat Moran earlier that kind of inspired this hot take. He basically said, like, it seems like Cody Ford is destined to just be the backup for 3 positions, which I thought about it. And that does make sense because we talked last week. Bobby Johnson loves Ike Butker. You brought up a story about his clinic, and Eric was at his clinic, and he used Ike Butker as like his model student. Consistently referenced Ike Butker. And Ike Butker has been a guy who the Bills have developed a lot throughout these last 3 years. So if they can get him a starting job, or if he earns the starting job, if he plays better than Ford, they won't have an issue giving Ike Butker. That's a hard name to say. They won't have an issue giving him the job. And then John Feliciano. He's played not great, but he's been serviceable at guard. Again, not irreplaceable, but he's been serviceable at guard since arriving 2 years ago. So with Cody Ford's positional versatility, with starting his first year at right tackle and then moving to left guard last year, and now seeing time on the right side, and Brandon Beane keeps hyping up his versatility and how they can play him anywhere, it does kind of seem, as Pat Moran pointed out, and as I am now saying, it does kind of seem like they are grooming him to just be the backup for 3, maybe 4 positions. I don't know if he supplants Bobby Hart as the backup left tackle, but it wouldn't take much. They could do Spencer Brown as the backup left tackle, but I don't want to see Spencer Brown play this year. I don't want to see Tommy Anderson or Jack Doyle play this year. Those are their names, right? I don't have them memorized. But I don't necessarily want to see them play this year. Good athletes, cool prospects, don't want to see them on the field this year. So in the case of Cody Ford, it might come down to they like him. He could start if they need him to start, but they prefer him as just a versatile backup who they know can come in and be a steady hand at one of three, maybe four, probably three positions, either of the guards or then right tackle, with, Feliciano and Butker obviously starting at guards, and then Forrest Lamp. In that case, I don't know if Forrest Lamp's on the roster. So you're not the biggest Cody Ford fan, but you thought he was going to win a starting job last week. So how do you feel about my take?
I think it makes a lot of sense because Cody Ford, I know, like, offensive line play in the NFL is very, very top heavy. And I think that if you have a quality backup, then you're in great shape. At least one guy that can fill in at two or even three spots. And Cody Ford is such like a fringe guy to me. Like, I think he's like a replace from what he's shown, albeit about playing through injuries and things like that. He has not shown that he can be a consistent starter in the NFL. Now, what this training camp and preseason will show us is completely different. But in what he's shown and put on film, he's not capable of doing that. So I think that but I do think that he is a fill-in player like that. So I do agree with your take, and I think it's a good one.
Steaming hot take, fresh off the presses, and it's gonna be right, though it could be wrong. In which case, I'm not taking blame. So, Rob, what's your hot take, and then we'll get out of here.
I'm flying off the cusp right here, and I'm just gonna say that AJ Epinesa plays the most defensive snaps of anybody on the Bills defensive line this year. Jerry Hughes was that guy a year ago, but he's getting older, and obviously the Bills want to use a rotation. I think that AJ Epinesa, with the way that he's looked, with the way that he's transformed his body, his second year in Leslie Frazier and working with Eric Washington, I think that he is going to be the guy that the Bills lean on while they groom Gregory Rousseau and Boogie Basham. Those guys will be rotational, but I think Epinesa is going to show us a lot this year. He really turned it on towards the end of last season. You saw like the juice and the burst and a little bit of the power that he has. And I think that he's going to be a guy that really impresses us this year.
That's a hot take. I like Epinesa. I think he looks good. Looks good coming off last season, where he was a little underwhelming, in my opinion. Flashed a bit, but you can expect a guy, coming off a COVID offseason, second round pick, where, that you don't really know what weight, or they didn't really know what weight they wanted him at. So it's
losing that amount of weight is tough on the body. I mean, losing 30 pounds and having to play defensive end is pretty tough.
Yes. So I'm not going to say I agree with you, but I'm glad you made the take. I'm glad you put it out there.
Keep it hot.
So before we get out of here, which will be soon, I'm just going to go through the comments again, see if we missed any comments or questions that we can quickly address here to wrap up. Because you guys sat through the podcast, you asked questions, least we could do is answer them. So going back to John's question, did we hit everything? Starting O-line left to right predictions. For me, it's Dawkins, Butker / Feliciano now. I don't know. Those are the two guards, and then Ford Williams. How about you?
I'm still going to stick with Butker at left guard and probably Cody Ford at right.
So much for my hot take. Yeesh. F.A. Obata is going to make the roster, yes?
I think so.
He's flashed.
I think so. Leslie Frazier talked about him, and I think he's going to be tough to get rid of.
If the Bills do go to Austin, Texas, if Bills do go to Austin, Texas, needs a playoff team. Now I'm just looking for comments. Can we trade Eichel for $1.5 billion? Thinking outside the box. That's a good question. Rob, know you're a huge hockey fan. How do you feel about the Jack Eichel situation?
Man, if they could swing that would be something.
That'd be a hell of a return there.
Yeah.
What else? Not on board with Butler. Hasn't impressed, but hey, you never know. Vernon Butler really hasn't shown all that much to me. He could be the odd man out, with all we discussed that. Greg, man, the first guest you guys had on is such a blowhard. I would tend to agree. John Feliciano hurt his shoulder. Any update on him? Unfortunately, no. there was I haven't heard any updates on John Feliciano, who left practice today with a shoulder injury. Does Lamp figure in at all? We kind of touched on it a little bit. I don't know. In my scenario where, they're keeping Ford as a rotational backup, who can kind of slot in anywhere. And then, Ryan Bates kind of does the same thing. He's the backup center, but he can play anywhere. I don't know. I don't know if they keep Forrest Lamp in that scenario, but I don't know if he wins a starting job. I think I don't really see him winning a starting job at this point. How about you?
Right. No, I don't think so. The fact that he hasn't really gotten any reps, even with the question marks at guard, is kind of indicative of what they think of him right now.
So that wraps up this second edition of the Cover One Roundup podcast. Again, on the Cover One YouTube channel and wherever you listen to podcasts. We are here live on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, and I think that's it. Every Monday at 9 p.m., breaking down the latest Bills news. We'll tell you what it all means, and we'll also have some hot takes to boot. So make sure that you follow Rob on Twitter at
Rob Quinn 619.
Make sure you follow Cover One on Twitter at Cover One. Make sure you follow all the Cover One people. Make sure you bookmark cover1.net. Make sure that you check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Cover1. Again, thank you to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this show and also Cover One in general. It means a lot. It really does. So any other follow me on Twitter at Kyle Silagyi if you want to. You don't have to. I completely understand if you don't want to. My takes are not great. So I think that wraps up everything here. Rob, anything else?
Yeah, make sure you're going to cover1.net and you're subscribing to our premium content. We've got a ton of awesome stuff in store this year, a lot of player interviews and feature stories, but not only stories like that, but a lot of film breakdowns, access to our Slack channel, which is always going crazy, a lot of analytics stuff, and Eric Turner's awesome at the X's and O's. As you all know, he built this thing based on the X's and O's into what it is now. So that premium content is really where you get all of that in one place, and it's very cheap too, and it's well worth it, and it supports all of our work. So I'd really appreciate it if you guys signed up. But with that, I think that's all we have tonight.
I don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much, but we kind of killed it last week.
Yeah, kind of.
We kind of killed it. Liam, David, I kind of killed it. So make sure you check out all of that stuff. Good articles over there. They do pretty good work. Me sometimes. But so again, thank you guys for watching. We'll be here next week. Same channel, same time. Bye-bye.